Hey everyone, Kevin here, and thanks for watching The Bottom Line. The series is all about custom lower trucks, and one of the hottest topics, or our hottest mods that, for custom trucks these days is air ride. Now, we already created a video a little bit back. We're gonna drop a link below, and basically where we looked at my S10 on if air ride is right for you, for somebody who's thinking about it. But you guys like that video, so we're gonna go a little bit more in depth and explain it a little bit more and how a system works. And if you don't know, basically what you do is you're taking a static type system on your suspension and you're replacing that with something that uses air to adjust up and down. And basically that's how these trucks, maybe you've seen some of the ones that we posted on the website that are slammed all the way on the ground. They're laying flat. You're like, you can't even get a penny under these things. And a lot of people see these pictures and they kind of go like, well, how do you drive the thing? How do you get over speed bumps? How do you go through driveways? Well, like I said, use what's called an air spring. And we got an example right here. And basically, here's your typical static spring that you find on a vehicle, factory vehicle. So it's not really gonna move. It's only gonna, go up and down when you hit a bump, just to make sure you have a smooth ride. But here we have the airbag itself. And as you can see, it's a little squishy and everything. What you do is you put air in this with a whole system that's managed and everything. And basically, with the weight of the vehicle, this can go down when there's no air in it. And you put air in it at certain pressures, it'll go up, and you get, I think this is a Slam Specialties RE7, you get about like 8 inches of lift out of these things. So you can get, depending on how your suspension is set up, you can get a lot of travel out of these things. So I can tell you with some personal experiences that, having an air ride vehicle is a lot different than having a static vehicle. And some of the reason why I did it on my personal truck was that, I lowered it at first and, I thought it was cool. When I did it, I was like, oh man, I saved up, a few $100 and got it down. And it was like a 5.7 drop or something on my S10. And then I kept seeing guys on air, they were cruising a little bit lower than I was. They were able to park at a show and just, have the frame sitting on the ground. And I kind of wanted to do the same thing. But, along with that, my experiences and what I can tell you is that an air system does come with a lot of maintenance because there's a lot of parts involved. I would say maybe consumable products like the airbags themselves, because they're gonna last maybe a decade or so. They're not gonna last forever, you can have a good system as long as you have everything set where it's not gonna burst or break on you on the road. You don't want that because basically you're gonna be slammed on the ground on the road, and you don't want that situation. But other things like compressors, they don't last forever. Your valves, manifolds, things like that. Also, they go out with time. You're gonna wanna keep your battery charged. And sometimes, with these Slam vehicles, we don't drive them every day. So you wanna keep that battery in tip-top shape. So maybe keep it on a charger or something like that, because you want that battery to be able to work the whole system and get ready to go when you need to. To help us show you how an air ride system works, we cruised down here to Old Anvil Speed Shop, and the owner here, Paul, has been basically building hot rods since he was like 5 years old. So we want to get his perspective. Hey, Paul, how's it going?
Hi, everyone.
So a question I want to ask is that, when somebody comes in that doesn't really know about air ride, what would you tell them, how a system works, or what to be prepared to look for in a system?
Probably the first thing I would ask them is what they want out of their car. If they want high performance where you can go through and run autocross, or whether you want to just lay low and look cool and go to some shows. There's the engineering behind the mechanics of it is really what's important. There's benefits to air ride and there's benefits to a static system. And that's the first question I would ask.
Yeah, and I want to get your kind of perspective on, I'm a firm believer that, airbags are nice. I think they're great for style, for getting down low. But I know a lot of people that have an air ride vehicle and have put, a lot of horsepower, a big engine in front, on their truck. And, I don't think, it just goes together. I think, coil spring or coil over, type suspension might be better for those. But where do you think airbags lie in relation to all vehicles, and, what would be their purpose?
Well, an air spring and a spring are basically the same thing. So if they're engineered correctly, you could use either one in either place. So there's, but the added benefit of air is you can actually adjust your ride height, and that's where the whole air ride movement has come into play. But most of the time for performance these days, it's a conventional spring, usually like a coilover setup, because it's so adjustable for your spring rate. You can change your spring rate, you can change, basically that's changing how stiff your ride is, where you can't get that with air springs unless you actually change the physical geometry of the suspension.
So there you go. I mean, basically, you hear it straight. You can have an air ride system that, performs a bit, that can hold up to some power, but, it's not like you're going to go racing, winning trophies or first place prizes in any race or anything like that. So honestly, if you're looking towards it, with your vehicle, if you want to do race, don't do your airbags, but if you want some style, definitely that's the way to go. But why don't you show me around this truck of yours, this, what is it, 66 C10 you have? And just, I think you created a system yourself. And yeah, just show me how it works.
Yeah, this is actually this is the very first chassis I started on. This is when I built in my garage several years ago for a customer, and he, due to life, basically, he wound up selling it to me. So this is we built a full rectangular tube chassis, and we make all of our own control arms, components. So it has 7-inch air springs up front, and then in the rear we did a parallel leaf 4-link and with a panhard bar, and it has 5-inch air sleeves to suspend it. Now,
I don't have much experience with air sleeves. The airbag that I showed earlier was what we call a double convoluted airbag. But tell me why you would use an air sleeve instead of something like a traditional double convoluted airbag.
The nice thing about an air sleeve is it has a lot more travel, and it's a smaller diameter, so it makes it physically easier to put in a rear suspension setup. The spring rate works out well because the smaller diameter, you run it takes less pressure on the rear because you're actually on the axle, where in the front you're compounded basically with an independent front suspension. You're usually about 1/2 to 2/3 of your of the leverage on your lower control arm, so you have to have more pressure from the spring, so it takes a bigger diameter air spring. So for the rear, the sleeves just work much better in that case, unless you have a different type of setup. If you're doing a leverage type setup where it has just a single bar, then that changes your leverage point. So then you can go to like a double convoluted bag. They work well in that situation.
So we haven't lost you so far, and you're still interested in air ride. And now you're kind of thinking like, how do I add a system like that to my truck? Well, there are, for certain vehicles, there are systems that are out there that basically you can bolt on a whole suspension and do it in your driveway or garage or whatever. They've made it so simple nowadays, but that's not always the case. I don't know if this truck was before that happened, but I know Paul's did some custom stuff to it. Paul, why did you actually set this up on a brand new chassis, and why did you go this approach with this truck?
We did a brand new chassis. This truck was actually a 3/4 ton long bed. So we've made it a short bed, and in the process you have to cut the frame. So why not just make some new frame rails? And then also that allows us to get it lower. So this truck actually lays on the frame when it's fully aired out. It's right at the bump stops, and it's basically as low as you can go without going into the ground. So and it also allows us to stiffen it up quite a bit, because these trucks actually the chassis were made to flex, and the bed used to rock enough to where it would hit the cab. So we're trying to eliminate that as much as possible, and this truck will actually have a lot more horsepower than it would have originally. We're putting an LS1 in it with a 4L60, so it's definitely going to have a lot more power. But that allows us to make some changes that just really work, so it'll ride nice. We can have that low look and handle the horsepower.
Yeah, and so I think you got a parallel 4-link in here, and why this particular suspension itself? Why did you design it this way? Was it the power?
Power's a big factor in that. Also, from where I came from and a lot of racing aspects, the parallel system allows where your pinion angle doesn't change, and also running a panhard bar. The panhard bar really works to keep everything centered. It doesn't give a whole lot of side-to-side movement when we have a longer panhard bar, and they're just super simple. It's one of the most economical ways to go and get the best handling. It's kind of just the all-around best package for all those aspects.
Yeah, and so you talked about roll and stuff like that. So I think right here we've got a sway bar here, and basically that's going to help prevent you know, the roll of it when you're going around a corner or something like that. Airbag vehicles are very, very soft, so they tend to want to roll if you don't have something like that in it. And here we go again, below it, that's the 4-link there. So there's 2 links, 1 on each side, 2 on the other. I mean, 2 on each side, 2 on the other. And then also back here, here's the panhard bar, which basically lets the rear end stay in place and doesn't let it move laterally this way or that way. So it keeps everything in place there. All right, so we talked about the rear suspension, which can be a little bit more simplistic in setting it up. Front end is a little bit more difficult, and you know, some people just like to stay away from it. But Paul, maybe you can guide us a little bit if somebody's trying to make their own front suspension and why you designed this one the way you did.
Yeah, this is to get the front end as low as we can get it and make it lay on the ground. You really have to go through a few things, for like drop spindles for one. These are Wilwood Pro drop spindles. It's based on a Mustang 2 style, but they're 1 inch taller. And basically, compared to stock, when you start really lowering things, it starts changing a lot of the geometry. So in this, I've actually added quite a bit of caster. We start out, we like to be like 5 to 7 degrees of caster. That way you can run 80 miles an hour down the freeway and the truck will stay straight. If you don't have that caster, the wheels don't want to try to return. A lot of the older vehicles, they'd run like 3 degrees, and then they tend to try to wobble, and you don't have that positive steering.
And for people that don't know, I'd say dummies, but you know, I don't want to call our audience dummies. But you know, people that don't know, you know, I didn't know things, you know, when I first got into everything. But caster, that's the relation of the top pivot point to the bottom pivot point. Am I correct?
Exactly. Yeah, it's how much. So the upper and lower ball joints, it's how much they lean, basically front to back of the truck. So when you add caster, it's like a caster wheel on a shopping cart, and it tends to make the wheel turn to the direction that you're going. And that's the whole principle behind it.
Gotcha. And what else to the geometry and how you set this up? What else is in favor for air ride? Would you tell somebody to take a look at?
Also, we've actually narrowed the front. So originally these trucks were, I think, 63¼ inches track width. That's from basically the flange of where the wheel bolts on to the other side. And now it's 60 inches. So we bring those in some. That gives us a lot of turning radius. In fact, this truck, because of this big lip on the fender, that the wheel will wind up hitting the hood and the fender. So by bringing it in, it fixes that. Also on this particular truck, the wheel wasn't centered in the wheel well, so we moved it forward 1 inch. So the wheelbase on this truck is actually 1 inch longer than what a stock short bed would be, because it looks right when it's centered in the front. Then we went to a rack and pinion steering. This has a power rack, which by using these Wilwood spindles in the rack, we have almost 0 bump steer. When I did this in a solid model CAD system, I think I had maximum of 1/8 of bump steer, and when it bumps, it actually makes the wheels come in a little bit, which helps stabilize it. That's actually a good thing. Then we added a sway bar, which gives us, from when you go into a roll, it won't allow it to roll, but also allows us to have a softer ride. So it doesn't take away from the springs, the air springs.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are putting, you know, if they don't have a modern rack and pinion steering, they're going to want to look into something like that. If you have a classic truck, no matter what, even if it's air ride or not, it's so much easier to handle a vehicle like that. But there are things to look at as well, you know, when you're adding a system like this, with the steering and keeping away headers. I know this doesn't have an engine, but basically it kind of shows you, I think all the steering is kind of tucked away a little bit so that it's out of the way when the engine is here. It's going to be right here. So that's, like I said, it's hugging the frame a bit. That's really nice. And here's our actual steering right here and everything. The rack and pinion itself, the sway bar up here, and then we got the double wishbones up here, you know, like he was saying with the caster in there to keep everything, you know, nice and tight when you're driving on the road. But if we take another look a little bit closer here, we can actually see the double convoluted bag that's in here. And basically, like I said, that's going to deflate, you know, when air's out of the system and the truck's going to go down like it is, and then it'll bring everything up when there's air in it. So the big component in here, the key component actually, is air itself, because it is air ride. So it rides on, well, it's compressed air. And there's a system that you have to have. There's different types of systems you can run and everything, but we'll have Paul explain it a little bit better on how these actually work. How do you get air into an air ride system?
So this truck has the Aguilar CVT. It's called a compressor valve tank. The compressors, because you have to have something to compress that air. It puts energy into the air and compresses it down. So the compressor is actually inside of the tank on this one. It's just super quiet. And then also the valves are inside of there. So there's those three things: the compressor, the valve, and the tank, and it's all in one piece. Also with that, you have to have a computer that controls the height. So this has height sensors, which
yeah, I think you showed me a little bit earlier. It's not necessarily hooked up, but basically this right here, we'll have another rod connected to that, to the actual suspension. All right, so you showed us the Aguilar system, the CVT system. It's got the compressors, it's got the valves manifold actually in itself. But why don't you show us around a little bit and just kind of explain this to everybody and how this system actually works, how the air gets in there and how it gets distributed and everything.
Yeah, so Aguilar has this is their control. This is all the brains of it.
Don't mind the wires, everybody.
Yeah, this is
still a project.
All this is still just kind of mocked up so it works. This is actually the controller, and they have different levels that you program. It basically, their system, it automatically programs it using the ride height sensors, and then from there you can just raise up and down each individual one, or you can set your presets. So like 1 would be your lowest preset, 2 would be a good ride height, and 3 is if you need to
probably all the way up to get
over a large
get over a large rock or something.
So from there, then it controls the ECU, which this ECU winds up controlling the air. Probably
the pressure that goes in and out and all that.
It controls all the pressure that's going to each individual wheel. And this one has the valves. The valves are actually in the tank. So these lines come out of the tank. There's a little valve inside that opens and closes and adds air to it according to what the ride height sensor tells it needs.
And so what about, yeah, this is a little bit of a complicated system here with everything inside, but what are we looking at, you know, for somebody that doesn't have something like this?
Something a little simpler, and this is a really good unit from Airlift. And this is where their actual valves are, and they also have their ECU, but it controls it. It's all external, so it's easy to replace if you need to, and these basically go to each individual wheel, and then you have air in and air out as an exhaust.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool that you have this to actually show, you know, actually separated, because with the Aguilar system that's on here, you can't really see any of this, but this is where everything works. Air goes in, and it tells it, basically manages it, how it comes out and how it gets distributed and all that. But cool, let's look at some of the other projects you got in the shop and just kind of, you know, maybe some of the different things we can do with Air Ride. All right, so we're at the other section of Old Anvil, and you can see there's a bunch of projects here, including another C10 that's owned by a customer, and Paul's did another Air Ride chassis in here. But I think we talked a little bit about it, that Air Ride suspension is not gonna hold up to power. But there is like a compromise. There's a product that kind of like will get you maybe a little bit of both. And Paul can actually show you here on this panel truck he's got right here.
Yeah, so we have a 55 Chevy panel truck. It has a TCI TCI suspension. And this is based on a Mustang 2 style suspension. So we have our upper and lower control arms, has a Mustang rack, And this one it's basically set up for a coilover suspension, but in place of that, it has a Ridetech Shockwave set up, and it uses a convoluted airbag on the outside of basically a coilover shock. So you're getting the best of both worlds with it. It's nice and compact. You don't have an external shock. It still will lay you on the ground, and you also have adjustability with your shock. So it just works well for in place of maybe even an existing coilover system. You can add this, and then you can get your lowered stance.
Yeah, and some of the benefits of running a Ridetech Shockwave is that basically it's tuned a little bit better. It also doesn't have an external shock because everything's all by itself. So it's pretty simple in in setting it up. If you have, like Paul said, if you have coilovers, you can just drop one of those in, and it'll work better with higher horsepower engines and everything like that. But so there's some options for you, and I hope this video was a bit educational for you guys. And if you didn't know much about Air Ride, if we covered all the bases there. If we didn't, drop a comment below and we'll answer your questions. If you like this video, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss another one, and hit that like button as well. And we will catch you next time.